Welcome back, Greeners. We are so glad to have you back on campus. I hope you're enjoying your lunch and that the programs this morning, those I attended, were really quite good. How were the programs that you all attended? Were they okay? That's great. Really glad to have you back for Return to Evergreen 2019. This is a great event and it's always fun to be a part of it. How many Evergreen graduates do we have in the hall right now? Stand up, stand up, stand up. All right. Thank you so much for coming. There are 40,000 graduates of this remarkable college. We have a good number here today. I'm expecting that next year we'll have 39,000 additional alumni coming back. But let me begin by a tradition that began a few years ago at the college, whereby we acknowledge the nature of the land on which we stand and work. The indigenous people of the Northwest, this is their land, their traditional tribal lands, and was ceded to the federal government in the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854. And one of the things we do at public gatherings like this is specifically acknowledging the Squaxin people, who are the traditional custodians of this land, pay respects to the elders past and present of the Squaxin Island tribe, and extend that respect to all Native people present here today. Thank you. How many of you saw the beautifully restored welcome woman at the opening of campus? Isn't that fantastic? She is a symbol of our commitment and support and relationship with many of the local tribes and our commitment and support of the many Native students we have here. The verbal remarks I make in opening sessions like this is one small way of affording respect to the Native peoples and indigenous peoples of this area. And I really invite you, as part of your time here at Evergreen today and tomorrow if you're still here, to learn much more about the history and culture of the present day circumstances of indigenous peoples here in the Northwest and elsewhere. And I would add that an increasingly integral part of the academic and cultural programs of the college are devoted to indigenous arts, education, and academic programs. And if you haven't visited our new buildings on the Indigenous Arts campus, our fiber arts studio, our carving studio, and of course the long-standing and the first longhouse on any college campus in this country, I'd welcome you to visit it. They're beautiful structures, and it's an area that we anticipate being a real source of growth and connection with the people whose land on which we stand and work. I want to also express appreciation and care for everyone in the room, particularly the volunteers, the alumni and staff, faculty and students who put this event together. So let's acknowledge them with a round of applause. Oh, I failed to introduce myself. Forgive me, I'm George Bridges, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of the college. It is a wonderful school to be a part of, and I can't imagine being anywhere else. It is great. Just a quick story before I do some acknowledgments of people here. It was a privilege to be just on Thursday in Washington, D.C. Washington Monthly, and this may be inside baseball for those of us in the academic world, is one of the leading college ranking services in the country. And what I love about Washington Monthly ranking of colleges and universities is the focus is not on the wealth of the institution, not on the prestige by traditional norms and values, but in terms of the contributions its graduates make to the country through public service and the world. And it's helpful to note that this year, Evergreen was ranked the #1 master's level college and university in the United States for its commitment to public service. I am so proud to be a part of the college, to be a college that cares about doing right for this country, doing right for our communities, and the fact that the faculties work with students, The commitment of our students and their passion for making for a better society is so integral to the culture of the campus and to the vision and mission that we have. It's very, very exciting. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge a few of the people who are here today who really make the college work and help all of us here who work here full-time hopefully make it a better place. I'd like to introduce two of our trustees who are present. Karen Fraser is the chair of our board of trustees. Karen, please stand. Karen, thank you. Karen was a former state senator and a leader in the Democratic Party here in the Washington State Legislature for decades. And I won't tell you how many decades, but it's more than one. But what's so important about that is she has proved absolutely critical in our work with the state legislature in advancing the support for the college in many, many ways that wouldn't have been possible without her leadership. And we were so glad to have you as our chair. The other member is an Evergreen graduate, Ed Zuckerman. Ed? Ed is kind of a trifecta Evergreen graduate because his father was a faculty member here at the college, and his son just graduated last year. So a threefer. Ed, way to go. Thank you for being on the Board of Trustees. We also have members of our senior leadership team here. These are the people that I get to work with day in and day out to help the college run and be successful as it is. So I'd like to name them, and then we can give them applause after they've all stood. John Carmichael, our Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer. Sandy Kaiser, our Vice President for Marketing and Communications. Where are you folks? Are you standing? Thank you, John. Stay standing, John. Sandy Kaiser is here somewhere. Sandy's over here. Tina Kukan-Miller, a Vice President for Indigenous Arts and Education, and Amanda Walker, a Vice President for Advancement and the Executive Director of the Foundation, our senior leadership team. And then we have a host of the Board of Governors of the Evergreen Foundation here today, and I'm going to read off their names and ask them to stand. Hold your applause until we get through the list. These folks play a really integral role in producing, yielding, and helping us obtain support for our students, primarily through scholarships, and are just invaluable volunteers who serve Evergreen so very well. John Hennessy, the chair of the Board of Governors. Andrew Ayala, a new member of the foundation who just graduated from Evergreen last year. Betsy Donnelly, an Evergreen parent. Sam Goldsmith, Scott Kaufman, Pam McEwen, Chris Myers, Greg Mullins, member of the faculty, and Oscar Sewell, a former faculty member. Our foundation board, please acknowledge them. Evergreen has always been a school that's been committed to public education and public service. The fact that so many of our students, you as early graduates or later graduates and our current students, involve themselves in the communities around the college and in government in so very many ways. And what I think that work does is it enables us, the college, to contribute to graduates who become ethical public servants, and produce many great success stories about the roles and contributions they make to our communities, to the federal government, to the state government. When I was in Washington, I had Amanda Walker and I were there for this opportunity to work with Washington Monthly. We had an appointment with another Evergreen graduate, Congressman Denny Heck, and he canceled our appointment, and I couldn't understand why until Amanda briefly told me, well, he's working on the House Intelligence Committee right now, and I think they're a little busy. Indeed, what an honor to have Denny there and to have a critical voice in the critical issues our country is facing right now in that area and so many others. I have the greatest confidence that he will help lead to some good solutions. This day is a day also to recognize an individual who has contributed to public service in very many ways. It is through the Joe Deere Award that we honor a single person for their service, an alumnus or alumna who has contributed in a variety of ways to bettering the public good. There have been many recipients of the award, just a few of those. Ron Charles from the Port Gamble-Sklalens tribe, class of 97. New York State Assembly woman Yuli New, class of 04. Washington State Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos, class of 85. The Washington State Teacher of the Year, Nathan Gibbs Bowling. 2 degrees, one in 04 and an advanced teaching degree in 06. And certainly we can't forget Washington State Department of Ecology Director Maya Bellin, class of 91. We will hear today from 2 Evergreen alumni who embody the whole nature and spirit of public service. I'd like one of them to come up, Andrew Ayala. And just let me say this about Andrew before he comes up. 2019 graduate and scholarship recipient, serves also on the Evergreen State, as I mentioned, college's Foundation Board of Governors. But while he was here, he contributed immensely in creating a number of organizations and supporting them to support students, did internships both here in state government, but also in federal government as part of his undergraduate education. And we expect him to play a very critical leadership role in the years ahead. So Andrew, please come up and share some remarks about your experiences. Andrew Ayala.
Appreciate it. All right. Thank you, George, and thank all of you for joining us this weekend to reconnect with the Evergreen experience. When I first came to Evergreen, I did so with a tremendous amount of curiosity and will. I often found myself asking questions like, what can I learn? And what can I actually do to bring about that change that I hope to see in this world? And while before I often became frustrated when asking these questions, Evergreen turned that frustration into a passion for public service. And soon that question of what can I do became what more can I do? I used to wonder why the immigrant community, the community that raised me, had to work so damn hard just to get by. And through an academic program here at Evergreen, I actually had the opportunity to go out into the community and teach English to newly arrived immigrants and make that transition a little bit easier. Let's see. And in addition to that, to actually being able to take action, I was actually able to maintain that connection to that culture that I was actually so scared of losing when I came to Evergreen. And another question that I had was that why one of my best friends, a fellow Evergreen student, never made it to graduation because he passed away while he was waiting to access mental health resources that he desperately needed. And shortly after that, through an internship opportunity with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, I was actually able to go out in the community and help people on their road to recovery. I was able to go out and actually do presentations to local police departments and local schools, actually raise awareness and reduce stigma. And after that, I kind of just asked myself, what more can I do? What's the next step that I can take? And so I lobbied the Washington State Legislature to push for resources that actually increase access to mental health. And during that first legislative session that actually went out there was not successful. Nothing on our legislative agenda passed. And 2 years later, while serving as an intern in the office of Governor Jay Inslee, I actually got to witness him sign into law groundbreaking legislation that would actually greatly improve mental health resources here in the state of Washington. And while none of these experiences would have been possible without Evergreen State College, without the help of scholarships that were made possible by donors, and by the hard work of the advancement team, who has become like a second family to me, so that's why it's a pleasure to actually serve on this foundation board, because I've experienced firsthand the power that scholarships have to actually make a difference, not just in the lives of the recipients, but in the lives of the people around them. And I'm also honored to be here today to present the 2019 Joseph Albert Deere Distinguished Alumni Award. The award is named after Joe Deere, an accomplished 1977 Evergreen graduate who dedicated his life to public service. His list of accomplishments includes helping to restore solvency to the California Public Employees Retirement System, heading the Washington State Investment Board and Department of Labor and Industries, leading the Federal Occupational Health and Safety Administration under Bill Clinton, serving as Chief of Staff to Washington Governor Gary Locke, and serving on the Evergreen State College Foundation Board. Joe often credited Evergreen with teaching him to think creatively and take into account the perspectives of others when tackling complex problems. The Joe Deere Distinguished Alumni Award was created after his death in 2014 to honor Joe's contributions and other alumni like him who continue to go above and beyond in public service. So before I invite him to the podium, I'll share a few highlights of this year's recipients' achievements. A Louisiana native and Evergreen graduate with an unmatched drive for social justice, he served as executive director of the National Education Association from 2011 all the way up until 2019. The National Education Association is the nation's largest union, representing 3 million teachers, education support professionals, higher education faculty and staff, school administrators, retired educators, and students. The NEA has been a powerful advocate for opportunity and justice for all Americans, and has given voice to some of the defining issues of our time. As the NEA's Deputy Executive Director from 2004 up until 2011, he charted a new course, mobilizing its ranks to support the improvement of the federal No Child Left Behind law, transforming its political organization and building new strategic alliances to champion public education. In addition, he served as a state senator in Ohio, winning a seat that had been previously occupied by a four-term incumbent. But hey, he's not done yet. He currently serves as senior advisor to the NEA, chair of the Democracy Alliance, and co-chair of the Strategic Victory Fund. It is my honor to present the 2019 Joseph Albert Deere Distinguished Alumni Award to John C. Stocks. Come on up, John.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you to President Briggs. Appreciate this. This is truly an honor and a privilege. As I said last night at the dinner that we had with some of the governors of the Foundation Board, I'm not one who seeks much attention. That's just not who I am. I like to lead from the back, and I am not your traditional upfront labor leader. So I'm a bit of an introvert. And that sometimes comes through when I am in these kinds of circumstances. So let me do a couple of things first before I talk about what I'd like to talk about. I want to thank the Board of Trustees. It's a very challenging time for higher education institutions in this country, and the board, as the fiduciaries and the people who need to lead with the presidents, really important bodies of work, and we need to be incredibly supportive of them. I want to thank the students, because students are really why we do this work. It's the most important aspect of why we are engaged in higher education. And the students are people, as we've heard, that need tremendous support. There are oftentimes challenges that we don't recognize when we are in the educational process, and students need to have different types of attention, and we need to be there for them. I'd like to acknowledge the distinguished faculty and the staff of this institution. There are a number of retired faculty here who, in my life, had an enormous impact upon it, who really helped shepherd my experience here and led me to the opportunities that I have today. I'd like to also acknowledge the fellow alumni who are here. Some of my dearest friends and people that I have stayed in touch with over many, many years are in the alumni, and through various aspects of my life on this campus have continued to stay in touch, and we have been in solidarity with one another on a variety of things. I'd like to also acknowledge the sisters and brothers in the United Faculty of Evergreen, which is affiliated with the Washington Education Association and my national union, the NEA, as well as the AFT, and acknowledge them as well. I knew Joe Deere. He was a servant leader. My first encounter with Joe was the result of Jolene Unsold, who was teaching a citizen lobbying course, which I had taken, where she sent me down to an organization called People for Fair Taxes and said, you need to understand who Joe Deere is, and you need to understand the fiscal construct of the state of Washington. You need to understand the tax system, you need to understand appropriations, you need to understand all those aspects of state government. And he's the best person to teach you how to do that. And so I went and sat at his feet and studied a lot of things to try to understand it. And then when I got back to the class, she said, now you need to go and register as a lobbyist, and you need to go advocate in the state legislature for a better tax system. And I think we're still doing that here today, as I recall, right? I know I wasn't successful then, and I know that that's still a challenge that we have. Joe was really a servant leader. He was somebody who made a tremendous impact, had a tremendous impact on workers. And he had that tremendous impact in the roles that he played in government. He had that impact when he was the OSHA director. He had that impact when he worked and led the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries, and he had that impact in a very significant way in the CalPERS operation in California with the public employee retirement system. He did save that system from ruin in the midst of the global economic crisis and recession that we all experienced in 2008. So he did for so many families the kinds of thing that we would all hope to be able to have an impact on in terms of their economic circumstances to ensure that they had retirement security, they had healthcare security. He was at the forefront of those battles as one of the most creative pension managers in the country. And he credited a lot of his success to this institution and the experiences that he had here. And what he did in crediting this institution is that he would often say that it was about the ability to understand how to be strategic. It was about the ability to understand how the set of skills that he learned here were applicable to being a significant manager. It was about the set of skills that he learned here with regard to being a leader and being a servant leader on behalf of so many people and in their interests. He was somebody who could do that in a way that really had an enormous impact, as I've said, on so many families. It is really an honor and a privilege to be receiving this award, given his character, given his skills, given his experience, given everything that he did in his life to have this enormous impact on the world. I had the opportunity to sit in on a little session here right before I came over to accept this. And the session was led by Jeannie Hahn and by John Burbank, who we affectionately know as Spider. And the session talked about the crises that we as a country are facing, and that those crises are of such enormous magnitude that it is going to require an enormous amount of effort of people of goodwill to actually solve those crises. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but those crises fall into some big buckets. One of them is the economic crises, largely driven by income inequality in this country. And frankly, government transfers can't redistribute wealth in the way that is necessary. And we've lost effectively worker collective bargaining, which is really the only other way where real transfer of wealth happens, is when people who are in unions have enough power to collectively bargain and actually deal with their employers and use that as a way to raise wages and hours and working conditions improvements. There's the political crises, which is not insignificant either. We're talking about a political system that is hell-bent on suppressing the vote, is hell-bent on disenfranchising people, is hell-bent on ensuring that money in politics is the norm through Citizens United, and has really emerged into probably government being one of the most corrupting influences right now in our whole milieu. And that is something that is incredibly dangerous. We have crises in social society, in society at large. One of the big ones that we don't often talk about, but that I'm trying to lead on from a position of my own journey around understanding white privilege that exists in my life, coming from an affluent family, being a heterosexual male, being somebody who has had positional power significantly in my career, that the issues of institutional and structural racism in this country are issues that we have to tackle as a society, and we have to tackle it together. And it is the sort of thing that people who look like me need to stand up and lean into that issue, because it has been here since slavery, and it has absolutely disenfranchised people of color throughout all of their lives and all of their generations. The last thing I'll touch on, which Jeannie and John talked about today, was the climate crisis, the issues of habitat degradation, the air and water quality standards being eroded, the things that really threaten the whole planet at large, and really is the existential threat that we have to face as a community, and particularly for the generations that come behind us. Now, all of that seems incredibly, incredibly scary, and all of it seems daunting, and all of it seems like it is something that could never, never get solved. But I actually am an optimist about this. And I'm an optimist in large part because of this institution. The people who come out of this institution are some of the most creative, strategic, smart individuals that solve big crises, problems in this country day in and day out, big and small. And we do it again and again, and it is a tribute to this institution, to the people who are its faculty, to its administrators, to its staff, to the students that come here, to the parents that support them, that gives us hope that these crises will be, in fact, things that we can tackle. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a movement moment. We're seeing it spontaneously throughout the country in various forms, and it will continue, guarantee it. Whether it's the Fight for 15 that has actually emanated from this state originally, or it's the Red for Ed movement, that is the movement that's been led by educators and supporters of public education across the country, or whether it's the students that I was with 2 nights ago who led the March for Our Lives after the gun violence at Parkland, or whether it's the Women's March that happened shortly after the inauguration of this president, so-called President of the United States, or whether it's the movement moments associated with the immigrant rights activity that's going on for the DACA students or anybody else. These movements, which are increasingly being led by youth, is a telltale sign that we are close to a breakthrough. Because as all of us in this room know, who are of my generation or older, it is the youth that ultimately are the ones that bring about the kinds of transformational change as opposed to reform that we need to have in this country. And the youth that are engaged in this particular institution around which they are, in fact, given the opportunity to do the kinds of study that this institution provides is critically important. It is one of the reasons why I partnered with some fellow alumni, including my friend Ed Zuckerman, to start a scholarship here, because we believe that it is important to ensure that people who are engaged in this institution as students have as much opportunity as possible to not have a financial debt burden when they are actually coming out of this institution, so they can get about the business of doing the kind of work that those movements are going to require them to do as they continue to foster and continue to come forward. With regard to education as an organization and with regard to this particular institution, I want to say a few closing words about what I think needs to be done. So we've got this time where we have these significant crises. We have this opportunity to actually engage in movements that are going to make significant change. We will certainly use our ability to leverage the government, but a lot of that system is rigged, and we're going to have to unrig it. That system is rigged because of money in politics. That system is rigged because of voter suppression and disenfranchisement. That system is rigged because of the corruption that exists within the halls of Congress and in the White House. And I hesitate to say, but it's true in the Supreme Court. So here's what we need. And this is what we all need to dedicate ourselves to, because we care about educational institutions, and particularly public education institutions like Evergreen. We need to acknowledge the importance of an informed citizenry to the democracy. That students need to know and understand how government works. They need to understand what it means when budgets are cut. They need to understand what it means when curriculum is narrowed and opportunities are restricted. I mean, how can we expect a country of informed voters when they don't start with the basic civic knowledge in our public schools? And that's what's happened in the public schools, is that we are increasingly narrowing curriculum, and we are leaving behind the very fundamental civic education that I think a lot of us probably benefited from, but others are not benefiting from. We need to have public institutions like Evergreen that show students the importance of representative democracy as it is modeled in their school sites. That's critically important, and it can be controversial, and it has been in this institution. But it is, in fact, what we need to embrace and lean into, because it is so lacking in so many of the schools that my members work in, those kinds of opportunities for students. We need to ensure that we are inspiring students through civic education in public institutions to be involved in protests, to be involved in activism, to lean into these very serious issues, understanding that maybe the state legislature might not approve, but the reality is that that's what we need to be about, because there aren't very many places where that can happen. And this alumni and retired faculty that are in this room, we need to stand with this institution when it gets into those controversies, and we need to express to those other power centers that that is what this institution should be about. And probably the thing, as I close, that I have learned later in my career that I didn't understand before when I was here. And that is the connection between democracy and education and the importance of the issue of equity. To understand issues of race was not something at the time I was here that I engaged in. It was probably here, but I wasn't exposed to it. And I got into my organization at the National Education Association, and with the changing student demographic and the faculty of high schools and elementary schools across the country being largely white, it became very clear that issues of race and racism had to be addressed because it was, in fact, beginning to permeate in those institutions because there were lots of students of color coming up through the system, as there are today, and a lot of white faculty that weren't race conscious. And so I made a determination that I had to, myself, understand my own privilege, understand whether I could use that privilege to help others advance, and to lean into issues of institutional and structural racism. All of us can mobilize around a specific overt racist act, like the burning of a cross. We can rally ourselves to do that. But understanding deeply institutional and structural racism in this country is critically important. And particularly people who look like me, we need to lead on that. Because the only way that we ultimately get to a just society in this country is through that issue. I was steeped in understanding class struggle. I was steeped in understanding issues associated with class. But I'm now convinced that the way to redemption for this society is through the issue of race. And I really believe that this is the kind of institution that can lead on this because it has absolutely gone through some of the fire associated with communities deal with this issue. In closing, Joe Deere was one of the true heroes of the American worker. He stood with them around their safety and health. He stood with them around their rights to bargain. He stood with them around their retirement security. He stood with them trying to ensure that they have voice. I can only hope that I have done something similar in my career, which I'm about to step down from. And I want to thank Evergreen for giving me the honor and the privilege to be given this award, and to absolutely thank all of my friends and family that are in this room who made such an impact on my life. I would not be where I am today if it had not been for the faculty, the staff, and the fellow alumni who are in this room. Thank you.